Hey there, Michelle Saxman here, and now it's Friday afternoon, and I'm wrapping up my week of treatment and assessment with the Plasticity Brain Center. Super thankful, really blessed to have spent the week here, especially when I thought I didn't need to be here because I was comparing my concussion to my daughter's concussion. And while I was here, I learned that there are actually 5 different types of concussions. So I wanted to give Dr. Antonucci the opportunity to educate me. I'm going to try not to take notes because I am a note taker, but I will watch this again real soon. So what are the 5 types of concussion?
Well, there are 5, but there's actually a 6 because the 6 is going to be the mixed type.
Oh.
Okay, so, and we always call it the 5 types, but one of the things we will realize, and also people that are watching this, is that you can have more than one of these 5 types. So they start with vestibular. You can have a cervicogenic, meaning from your neck. You can have ocular, where your eyes are not working properly, so that's 3. 4 would be migrainous or autonomic. Our autonomic nervous system controls our blood flow and things like that. And then the last is the cognitive emotional subtype. So those are the 5: vestibular, ocular, cervicogenic, emotional, cognitive, and also migrainous and autonomic. And each one of them has different symptoms. So for example, in the vestibular one, you could have dizziness, disorientation, spatial awareness issues. And
can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Symptom of that would be, I was someone who could be very organized, and I'll just pick the kitchen counter, let alone a workspace, and I was having a difficult time kind of pulling out the coffee grinder, and I was mixing things up on the counter. And so things that I thought normally I could kind of put the system and the puzzles together, and I was crossing things up, making sandwiches, and something always ended up on the floor. So I had a very difficult time with the spatial piece. Not so much dizziness,
Right.
but definitely what I think you called spatial dyslexia,
Yeah.
which is not something, I knew it was post my car accident, but I didn't know it was a concussion thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so vestibular.
Yeah, and I think you articulated something very important there, that vestibular doesn't always have to mean dizziness.
Okay.
Our vestibular system is is in our inner ear, and it integrates into all parts of our brain. It's such an old system that even dinosaurs had inner ears like we do because it's been existing for so long. So it's so infused in all of our brain functions. But then that goes and leads to, I'm going to skip a little bit because you identified a good thing, kind of having the spatial disorientation where you lose your spatial awareness and you're going to grab a cup of coffee and you grab a glass instead of a mug. That affects your cognitive function. So that's where the mixed type comes.
Okay.
But so we had vestibular, which is dizziness or disorientation. You have cervical, which is...
I've never heard of this one.
Yeah, the cervical is like when you get the whiplash, and you can have issues with your neck and musculoskeletal dysfunction that gives you concussion-like symptoms.
So, but everyone talks about concussion-like symptoms, and I'm going to say that's the headache, dizzy, nausea. And if your kid doesn't have that, they're not concussed. That's not the case.
No, there's a list of 20 or 30 different symptoms. At least, well, the American Physical Therapy Association, as well as the American National Trainers Association, have kind of done these meetings where they get together and they try to identify the symptoms. And there's 27 different symptoms of concussion that they've come up with. And these 27 different symptoms are usually clustered into 4 different categories. And those 4 categories are sleep, cognitive affective, vestibular, and physical, and emotional. So those are the 4 categories with 27 different symptoms. So you can have 0 symptoms in the first 25, but have 2 of the 26 and 27, which can mean that you have concussion. So yeah, it's very important just to realize that a concussion doesn't always have to have dizziness, disorientation, or headache. And even those are newer, because if you rewind 7 years ago, a concussion was diagnosed by cognitive difficulties.
Memory,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they would do just cognitive tests to say, do you have a concussion or not? It's not since only the last couple of years where people have been starting to consider vestibular and consider visual or eyes.
Okay.
So originally it was just cognitive. And now we're realizing there's a lot more physical signs and symptoms that go along with it.
Okay, go to autonomic, and because an autonomic was the one I learned a lot about last time.
Yep.
And then I'm in a couple of like concussion recovery Facebook social media groups, and there's a lot of people that I think struggle with some autonomic that weren't tied to a brain injury.
Sure.
Because they can say, now my blood pressure's doing this, or my heart rate's doing that, or my body temperature's doing something, and I'll say cold hands, cold feet, I think I might be anemic, and we're taking some of these symptoms and we're attaching them to something that's not from the brain.
Yeah, and that is what a lot of people do. The autonomic ones are probably the most, I don't want to say this wrong, they're usually the most pervasive ones, because what I mean by pervasive, it affects multiple systems. So your autonomic system is, and some people have heard of this as our fight and flight and our rest and digest system.
Okay.
Those are our autonomic, our parasympathetic, and our sympathetic systems. When you have an autonomic-based concussion, one of the things that a lot of these individuals get are headaches, but you can also have lightheadedness when you get out of bed. You can have your heart racing. You can have changes in your hormones. You can have changes in your energy levels, your body temperature, because that autonomic nervous system really regulates everything of that fight and flight and rest and digest. And digest also affects gut function.
Right. Okay.
Right?
The ability to extract nutrients
From your food.
Right.
Exactly right.
So I also say the way I try to describe autonomic is the things your body does automatically without you having to think about it. So your body's going to digest food without thinking about it. Really and truly paying attention to the way you're breathing, because your body will take in the oxygen it needs. But when you're in more of an autonomic concussion, what I noticed was maybe some more shallow breathing.
Absolutely.
And elevated. Somebody might just say you have anxiety, but really it's just feeling kind of unsettled on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that definitely happens. It's because you think about even breathing. These people breathe really shallow. Usually they'll have tight shoulders, and that stress sort of response. And it also affects your immune system too, where you can get extra inflammation from having that autonomic dysfunction.
Okay, I want to talk about cognitive. Were cognitive and emotion together?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
go ahead and talk about cognitive and emotion.
Yeah, so with cognitive emotion, a lot of times we like to call them affective disorders with an A, not an E.
Okay.
Affected, like affect is changed. So your ability to interact with the world from a cognitive perspective, or to manipulate your environment, doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing, and having the right emotion assigned to the right environmental challenge or the wrong emotion. So realistically, those concussions are largely of the frontal lobe, where your frontal lobe is injured, where that's the part of our brain that makes us human. So if you have a concussion and you don't have any symptoms, but your personality is changing, it's probably because you're suffering from a cognitive affective type of concussion.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question on, because you brought up frontal lobe. Some people, and I could be one of them, thinking if you take your bonk in the front, then you have frontal lobe. And other times it's when something comes from the back that forces the brain to the front is frontal lobe. So
those are called coup and contra coup injuries. And people that think that are not wrong, because that was what we thought concussion was all the way up until about 2004. After 2004, there were some really prolific researchers that did some research that showed that if you have an MTBI, a mild traumatic brain injury, which we say there's either minimal loss of consciousness or no loss of consciousness, at that point in time, it's called a fluid percussive injury, where if you think of like a bowl of Jello and you whack a bowl of Jello, it'll go back and forth like this. It's not necessarily the Jello hit the bowl on either side, it's just moving back and forth like this. So it's a percussive type of an injury. And what they're finding is all of the damage in a fluid percussive injury is in the center of the brain. So it doesn't matter if you hit your head here, hit your head here. And if we know what's at the center of our brain, we start to say, well, this makes so much sense. This is where our autonomic structures live.
Okay.
This is where our eye movement structures live that control our eye movement. This is where our vestibular system, the nucleus for our vestibular system is. Our thalamus, our sensory relay center. So all of these different symptoms that we're talking about all live right in the stalk of the brain, right through the middle of it, and can present you with all these types of challenges without bruising your brain.
Okay, the other piece of the cognitive emotion that I want to bring up, and again, this is questions and dialogue that I see occurring in some of the groups that I engage in. And so it'll be, and I'll pick a teenager, but it can be an adult certainly. And I think there's a little tiny bit, and I'll say depression, acceptance of a concussion and a change of lifestyle. So there's a little bit of a normal, I don't like where I am. But then there can be high-risk behaviors that weren't customary for that individual.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we want to attach it to the depression and the circumstance, and we don't want to think about the brain. And a lot of times it's the brain, and it's not the person. You can't blame the person.
That's right. Yeah,
So,
and I think you made a really good point there, and that's just something that we like to emphasize with our patients too, especially if our patients come in and say, you know, I'm taking an antidepressant because I'm depressed. Well, the question is are you a depressed person, or are you depressed about your situation? Because those are two very different things. If your dog died, you can be depressed about that. You're sad. That's an appropriate response to an appropriate thing that happened in the world. But a depressed person is depressed before their concussion and after the concussion, and depressed in all aspects of life. So that's important. But as you kind of said, that all of those behavioral changes, they can come from a bunch of different things. It doesn't always have to be just the frontal lobe. There's different structures in our brain that are deep in the center that regulate emotion as well too.
So where would cognitive emotion, or doesn't go that way?
It doesn't
Remember,
go
we
that
talked
way.
about it. It'd be really nice if there were just, like, it's just right, left, front, back.
Yep.
But it's really the pathways.
Right.
And so it's not like I just have damage right here and you can fix right here. It's because the way
No.
this is communicating.
They're networks.
Yeah.
It's the networks that get injured. So when you have that fluid percussive injury and the brain is shifting back and forth like this, the transmission of what we call long and short range networks become dysfunctional. So you don't get information going from one area of your brain to another efficiently or effectively. So that whole kind of philosophy of we only use 10% of our brain it's nonsense. We use 100% of our brain 100% of the time. It's just how great is your 100%.
And how aware of it, because so much of it is the autonomic, like it just is occurring because it's natural for it to occur. But I think sometimes when after for parents, and it could be a high school athlete that has suffered, and then they're acting out drugs, alcohol, petty, whatever, they're shoplifting, and they're going, that's not my kid. No, it's not your kid.
Right.
And even though they're no longer having headaches, they might be having some other symptoms. And so I think we have to think back and really be open to this functional neurology piece and getting to the right place to get the help. I want to ask if you're okay with it. I think I have a decent understanding of the 5 areas. I'm going to have to rewatch this, but I want to ask a few questions on when is it too soon and when is it too late. So again, we talked about the concussion, the first 24, 48 hours, 14 days, and 90 days. When is it too soon to seek help, and when is it too late?
So help has to just be a little bit more clarified.
Okay, coming to you.
Okay, so coming to someone like us, well, we've got a network of doctors. If you kind of go to a website called the ACNB, the American Chiropractic Neurology Board, acnb.org, there are like, I don't know, I think 900 or 1,000 functional neurologists in the country that are board certified right now. And there's over 15,000 doctors that have trained as we've done. So I would probably say in your first 14 days, you want to go to your primary care physician. You want to go to make sure that you don't have a brain bleed. We just had somebody here a couple weeks ago that came in and they hit their head in a sparring match, and then we're like, something's not right here. We sent them out for an MRI and he had a brain bleed. So you have to make sure that you've got the acute attention, get the MRI, CT scans, so that's the first 14 days in rest. After the 14 days, one of the things you should start doing is just seeking some advice from somebody that understands concussion. Even through our conversation right here, we can understand that there's too much for somebody to know about concussion, so you have to seek something from a professional, and more specifically a professional that understands the 5 different types of concussions and the interplay of the nervous system. So after that, you can kind of probably spend the next 90 days or so.
Can that be found on your website? Because I know you have a Neuro Network at Plasticity, but or else I'll get into the comments and I'll post what that website was.
Yeah, we have a bunch of doctors that work with us specifically called our Plasticity Neuro Network. These are doctors that kind of ascribe to the same thinking patterns as we do, and they say we want to support your patients near us and things like that. So with the first 90 days, it's best to stay local and work with somebody nearby, whether it's a chiropractic neurologist, a physical therapist, anybody. And after the 90 days, if you feel like you're not getting to the point where you want to be, that's when we can assess.
And that was me.
Yeah.
I made it to 100 days, and then I came down.
But you came into the appropriate time because you exhausted all your options back at home, and here we are. We were able to help you substantially, I think, in 5 days. Too. But the most important part is going to be your follow-up, right? So we need to work with you, and we need to work with your other people at home that you've been working with to make sure that we can carry you across the finish line.
Okay, I'm going to give you, is it too late? So one of my friends asked me, and I don't know how old their child is today, but at the age of 2, on a tricycle, went down a flight of steps, drove the bike down concrete steps, then had a high school injury. I don't know if it was sports related or a car accident. And then later, whether it's 20s or 30s, had another one. It's been about 5 years since the last concussion. Is it too late to come?
No, it's never too late. We've had individuals, we just got finished writing a study that we're doing with the University of Central Florida's College of Medicine. We're looking at, we specifically looked at individuals that have been protracted from their injury. So 3 years, around 3 years or greater. And we've had some individuals that had their concussions or their head injuries at 17 years prior to them coming here,
Wow.
and they did really, really well.
Okay, I'm going to speak to that because I don't think you go after the symptoms I tell you I have. I think you do the full assessment and you determine the area of greatest weakness.
Right.
Because our bodies begin to compensate. And I had a lot of stuff going on where I found a lot of comfort leaning to the left. And I didn't know it. My body was just trying to find balance. And so, although I think I might know where my greatest weakness is, it's through your testing. So that's why I would say, I don't care how long you've been post-injury, I think that you can find the greatest weakness and make tweaks and improvements.
Right. We can't be chasing symptoms.
Oh, no.
Symptoms are a lot of times red herrings. They take you off in the wrong direction, especially if somebody says, I've got really bad neck pain. And then we do an MRI of their neck or x-rays of their neck. There's nothing wrong with their neck. So you get individuals that treat the neck. You're chasing the symptoms, so that person never gets better. So what we do is we take symptoms into consideration because that tells us how that person's suffering, what their goals are, what they really want to see get better. But we acknowledge those and then we say, okay, well, let's look at our data and see what our data tells us we need to do. And let's see if the data connects the dots between the symptoms. And I can't say that there's been a time that hasn't happened. We can always connect the dots.
Okay. I'm going to quickly change gears on 2 questions and come back to concussion.
Okay.
Autism. My 18-month-old child's just diagnosed. Too late or too soon?
18-month-old, there's not an age range that we work with. So let's start there. What affects how successful it can be is compliance. So there are children on the autism spectrum or that are severely autistic that are they're introverts. They just sit there, they don't talk, they're socially a little bit challenged. We can do wonders with somebody like that. But if there's a child that has autism that's punching and throwing and ripping things off of walls, and I had one child that would always try to headbutt us when we got close and bite us, those individuals don't respond as well because we just can't get the interaction there. So it's not necessarily an age number. It's
so
more
if they're 15
function.
years old, it's okay to come?
Absolutely.
It depends.
And we had an 8-month-old.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I did hear about that.
We had an 8-month-old that came in with a rare neurological condition that there was no treatment for. And they said, well, we just want to try this. What's the worst that happens? It doesn't work. There's no side effects of what we do. It's either health or nothing.
Right. And I'll say, I credit y'all. I think you have such a high effective rate with your patients because of your screening process. I think you know who you can help, and you're not here to take people's money.
Correct.
You're here to give people life back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have an expensive service. You work one-on-one with one doctor all week long. You don't have high school graduates coming in and doing your therapies. It's one-on-one with a board-certified doctor doing all of your therapies, making observations. So it is an expensive therapy, and it's intensive, and it's everything that insurance companies don't want from you.
Right.
Repetitiveness, overutilization, because we're testing for all these little things. So, you kind of said that it is. We don't want to take people's money, but it's an expensive service to offer. But the value is in the results.
Yes, and I'm going to ask that quick MS question. MS generally, I know you work with patients, MS, Parkinson's, things like that, and I'll go as soon as diagnosed, and then let's say 10, 20 years from diagnosis. How are you in working with people? Is it best to come as soon as you're diagnosed with Parkinson's or MS? Or someone like me, I know people who are diagnosed in their 30s and now they're in their 50s. Can they still come at 50?
The answer is yes, around across the whole spectrum there. So when we look at MS, we look at Parkinson's, things like that. Those are all what we call degenerative conditions.
Okay.
MS is a little bit of an interesting one because sometimes you can get remissing and relapsing. So those people sometimes just stay in the rank. But basically, when we look at something that can deteriorate over time, the sooner you catch it, the sooner you do something about it, the better it is.
Okay.
But that being said, you can search our website. We've got videos of individuals that had MS, that had their arm paralyzed, and they couldn't move their arm, and all of a sudden they're reaching above their head 4 days later.
And I'll say, not this time, but the last time I was here, someone, I believe, was about 3 years post-stroke. And I don't know what that stiffness is called, but that's what y'all were here, and that's what you were working on.
Yeah.
And so 3 years post a stroke is okay to come.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go back to concussion, but I hope I answered a couple of the questions that y'all had kind of sent me, whether you private messaged me, text me, or through the Facebook feed. The next question I have is, again, from a concussion person, if I cannot even get through the day, I have a difficult time getting myself to the grocery store, how can I do this?
So that's a great question. I know it's a lot of fear that people have is like, if I can't do my normal daily activities, how can I possibly go through 5 days of intensive therapy? And we actually have somebody here this week.
I'm going to correct you on intensive. It is incredibly passive, but effective.
Yeah.
You don't have me breaking sweats back there.
Right.
I'm doing the tiniest movement with my neck, and I'm controlling my eyeball. So it's intense.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's.
Yeah, it's not. It's intense, but not demanding.
No, you're right.
All right. So I think that's probably a better way to express it. Yeah, it's not demanding. It doesn't take a lot of physical.
No, but
I often tell people it's like when you're taking your SATs, you're just bubbling in dots, but you're exhausted afterwards because it was intensive. So I can see how that could be intimidating for some people, but that's where we rely upon our team. That's where we rely upon Dr. Link, Dr. Columbahetti, Dr. Barton, all these doctors with their fine observations to see, okay, I can push this person a little bit farther, or no, I've got to pull back because they're not going to make it to the end. And it's kind of the old cliche that the rabbit doesn't win the race, the turtle does, right? So we've got to go slow and steady throughout the week. And we make everything so that everybody gets through the program and gets the results that they're wishing to get out of it by kind of tailoring it for them. So it is intensive in the fact that you're here for 3 hours a day for 5 days, but like you said, it's not necessarily physically demanding. And usually what ends up happening is people find, for example, we had a woman here this week that had terrible vertigo. She had a syndrome called maldebarkament syndrome, where she felt like she's dizzy, vertigo all the time. And first thing she said to me, she's like, there's no way I'm getting in mark.
That's the chair that spins on multiple axes.
Yeah, she's like, I'm spinning all the time. There's no way I'm getting in a mark. And she said, on the way here, the only thing I was anxious with is getting in mark. And I said to her, well, we're going to have to do that because that's what's going to make you better. So she went on it one time, she got off, and she's like, that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. And then she started going faster and faster. And today, last thing she said, she's like, I just want to get back in the chair.
Do I get to get in? I think I have one more time.
Yeah, I think you do. I think you have one more. Yeah, so the thing is that sometimes it's counterintuitive. You don't think you can do something, and that thing that you don't think that you can do is what you have to do to get better, and it comes a lot easier than you would expect it to.
I'm also going to give you credit for the one doctor per patient, because I think that doctor gets to know when you've met your limit, and they know how much further to push. Can I push one more? Or is it really time for me to back off?
Right.
Or, hey, you don't have the spunk you had earlier. Did you eat? Are you drink? Like, they get to really know your disposition and how far they get to go. So I would say it can be done because it is completely personalized.
Yeah,
and it's to each person's threshold.
You know, I can't say that I've seen the worst of the worst, but we've seen some people that are pretty, they're struggling hard when they get here, and they make it through the entire program. So
I'm going to say I've been here and seen people in wheelchairs that their only mobility is their eyeballs. And they make it through. And so I think it's about faith and trust.
Absolutely.
And trusting the process. Okay, well, that's it for me for today. If you all have any more questions, keep posting them down below, and we'll make sure that we get back to you. So y'all have a super blessed day. Happy Friday. Have a safe weekend. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.